All right, welcome to today's live stream. Today I have with me Cary Tapscott, who is our Director of Client Success at Avero, oversees several large-scale ERP implementations, and we're talking about how to choose an ERP vendor or system without getting
Mhm.
locked in. Cary's right here across from me, so if I'm
Hey, everybody.
looking away from the camera, I'm looking at Cary. Um, but welcome to the live stream. Chat box is open. Let us know where you're calling from, and as always, ask questions. This is going to be an exciting, interactive session because Cary runs, again, lots of large projects for cities, counties, airports, and you know, there's been some learnings throughout the process as we
There
implement a lot
have,
of
yeah.
projects. So, what's on your mind, Cary, about this?
It's a great topic, and I think as we take on bigger and more complex projects, we're seeing a lot of vendors try and force the client into their process. And while it is a proven process and these vendors have good track records, it might not help these organizations achieve the goals they're trying to do with these business transformation processes. And we want to make sure that vendors aren't shortcutting any of the strategic goals these organizations have in place and the reasons why they're upgrading or trying to replace their existing ERP stack. A lot of these people are trying to make their teams and their organizations more efficient. And we want to make sure that vendors are not locking them into a process that may have come over from the private sector. It might not be fine-tuned for a public organization or their specific modules needs. There's HCMs, there's core financials, there's procurement, asset management, you name it. And we want to make sure the process for those individual modules are fine-tuned and crafted specifically for that organization, not just basically a find and replace from another project that vendor's done.
Well, and that's been the problem, right? Cookie cutter approaches.
It is, yeah.
Where vendors are coming in with this worked and this county should work for you because it's what counties like you do,
right?
Without taking into account the fact that it's a unique county.
It is
a unique organization, unique airport, and no two airports or no two counties are exactly the same.
100%, and you nailed it with the cookie cutter approach. And it's not just, yes, there are special districts, there's state requirements, there are things that are specific to the organization they're running, whether it be an airport or a county or a city, but there's also the way they've done their business and the way their organization has been run for the past, we'll say 20 years, which is the average age we're seeing of our system we're replacing. And they've got to look at the way they do business. These are, while they're public entities, everyone's called a business line. Yeah. And these unique business lines have unique aspects to them. And the cookie cutter approach, while it worked great in the 90s and early 2000s, it's funny, cookie cutter and customization can go hand in hand. We're moving away from the customization because those configurations have gotten very expensive, even with systems migrating to the cloud, but you still need to customize and configure certain aspects of these new systems to that organization, how they do business. You can't just walk in there and force these new processes down their throats. And yes, you can tell the stories about how it worked for this county down the road or this airport across the other side of the country, but you still need to think about the individual aspects of these clients and what they're trying to accomplish. I think about some of the, you mentioned it, but I'm privileged enough to run some very large projects for Avero. And one in particular, there's some very unique things about them. And that's the third time I've used that word in the past 2 minutes, but it's because the cookie cutter approach doesn't work. And you've got to really learn how the organization functions as a business and the individual business lines and why they're doing the processes the way they are, and then adapt and be creative and nimble. And that's one thing I really like about Avero and our size is that we are nimble in our approaches to clients. Just because this worked with County A doesn't mean it's going to work with County B. Yes, we'll take aspects of that, but that's why consultants are great, is we learn from previous experience with other clients and can modify the approach and the processes to help the next client achieve their organizational goals.
So give us an example of how you've seen this play out, right?
Sure.
When you say vendor lock-in, the typical thought that comes to mind is vendor lock-in typically means I'm locked into this ecosystem, I can't leave. without major pain or expenditure, or both.
Unfortunately.
But it plays out in small ways, in a day-to-day implementation manner. So what are some examples of that?
Sure. I think about where you've got, this is a recent one of mine, so please bear with me. I'm still a little,
That's
still
good.
sensitive to it. But in the vendor's plan and approach, they had included a benefits module. But the way the benefits module, this is specifically for retirees, this vendor could not operate a benefits module for retirees. And their approach to the client is we want you to set up a separate company in an additional module. So it'd be a second instance of your HCM to run your employee retiree benefits. And the client took a step back and they said, why? And they said, well, this is how all other clients do it. And our system can't support two benefit modules inside the same instance. And the client got very defensive and brought up the original RFP that we had helped them create and issued and said, this was a major point in the RFP, that we wanted to have a single benefit module that could handle current employees and retirees all under the same umbrella. And the vendor was trying to force them into their process. And the client stood their ground and said, no, that is going to make us just as inefficient as we are today. And the whole point of this project was to make their HCM environment more efficient, because they still had paper employee applications. They were doing paper benefit elections. They were doing all this stuff on paper. And now they're going to have to run a separate employee retirement benefit module that will have to be cross-referenced and validated, and making sure that, there's beneficiaries where if that employee may have passed on, that their wife or spouse or husband gets those. And it was counterintuitive to the entire process. And so we supported our clients and said, this is not going to work. And if you all can't help us solve the original problem and the whole point of this RFP, we're going to have to look at other solutions. And the vendor kept pushing back, and finally they ceded some ground, and we found an alternative integration that allowed them to do employee retiree benefits that would then integrate and feed into their main employee module, and they'd be able to cross-reference and validate and do it all and automate the entire thing, so they're not having to go in and do it manually. And we routinely see this where you will see a client go through the RFP process, work through the scope and the SOW and all the T's and C's, and then 2 to 3 months into implementation, the vendors have, I don't want to call it a gotcha, but a surprise, right? And unfortunately, a lot of those you don't find out about until 2 to 3 months in. And that's where our experience comes in, is having worked with a lot of these vendors and saying, hey, here's what you need to look out for. Here's what they're going to say they're going to do. Here's the process they're going to try and force you into. And if that doesn't align with your organization, stand your ground, be firm, and we will find, Avero being nimble, will find an alternative solution.
So where do you think the mismatch was? Because you said the RFP was pretty clear.
It was very crystal clear, to quote Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men.
But when implementation began, all of a sudden, this vendor couldn't do it. So I know you found another alternative, but what was that discussion like in detail? Because this is now it's an RFP you responded to, it's in the contract, and now you're saying you can't do it.
Right. So the solution there is that the prime vendor actually backed out the cost of their entire benefits module in the contract amount. So the client wasn't out any money, but they're still out time and resources and planning on that 2 to 3 month gap. So really the solutions I think this is where reference calls can really be beneficial to clients. And we run them in conjunction with the clients and their procurement team, and usually the steering committee or the project sponsors. But on the reference calls, really talking to those current clients of those vendors about the gotchas, the surprises, the things they didn't expect, that either slowed down their project and cost them time and resources, which we all know equals money, or cause them to push things like their go live date or the original scope on the contract. So reference calls can be critical to this. I think we tend to make them, we see a lot of times that vendors and clients are a bit too high level on them. Get down in the mud and in the weeds with these people and ask them what surprises there were, what they didn't expect. any change orders that happen in the first 3 months. We're all used to change orders a year or so into a project when you realize you're not on time, you're not, your budget's going a little long. What change orders did you experience in the first 60 days of a project when no one expects them, right? Those are the ones that, reference calls can be huge there. Also on the requirements, tell them that you want clients that are not brand new in the modules, right? That we don't want anything that's been implemented that they're still in 3 or 4 months into implementation. We want people who've been implemented and are 12 months, 16 months post go live, to really get a good idea of what they experienced during that process.
So I did a long video on reference checks
Mm-hmm.
a couple of weeks ago, and how not to do them is just asking, "Are you satisfied?"
Right.
Right? Because think about reference checks. These are the same references that go in almost every RFP,
Almost everyone.
every proposal. So the people you're talking to are sort of sensitized to the questions. They're going to want to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And satisfaction in software implementations is a very relative fuzzy term. So the video I did talked about 4 or 5 specific questions to ask on that, and this could be one of those, right?
Yeah.
Like, how would you frame a bulletproof reference question that covers this particular item?
Put me on the spot. I think a way I would frame it would be is what unexpected change orders or scope changes happened in the first 90 days of your project once you had been meeting with the implementation team well before UAT, any sort of configuration, that when you all got into the real meat and potatoes of this project, that you realized there was a gap in what they presented versus what is on paper and what they actually can do. Vendors are great, but they all say they can deliver the world, and we want to make sure of that. So I think the reference, if the question I would ask is where did they, I don't want to say overpromise and underdeliver, but what significant gap was exposed once you started having the regular meetings with the implementers, or the SIs or the vendor, in lack of coverage that your organization needs. So I'll wordsmith that a little more because I've got some reference calls coming up later this month for a client. And this is making me second guess myself on our questions there and really get down there. But I think that'd be it. Something along those lines. Tweak it however people need to better suit, their RFP. But definitely, in the first 90 days, what gaps or deficiencies did you discover?
Yeah, and I put the link to that video I'm referring to in the chat box. And I think one of the key questions that stands out to me is, if you were to do this all over again, what would you do differently, right? You get people thinking about what reference they're giving, how they're actually helping the person asking the reference question, and not just saying yes or no to these pretty broad questions.
And this is another great example. You've got me thinking, what would you do differently? We just kicked off a project with another client, with a new client, who was 28 months into the implementation of their new HRIS, and they pulled the plug on it. And now we're being brought on board to help them find another vendor who better aligns with their organization. And when we first met with them, we did we had a meeting where we did basically an autopsy of what went wrong. And they admitted that a lot of what went wrong is they followed the vendor process too much. The vendor told them the implementation would not require a significant amount of time from internal county resources.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 months into implementation, they realized that it did require that time, and they hadn't planned accordingly. So they were trying to have people do 2 jobs at the same time, do their day job and work on implementation. And then 8 months into that, they realized that people couldn't do it. They were getting burnout, and they were trying to then dedicate resources entirely to the project and backfill their roles, and doing that in real time, while also running 2 systems in parallel for 18 months.
Well, so that brings up a really good point, right? All of this needs to be defined up front.
It does.
Like, how much work have we done with a couple of our clients right now? Year and a half of just getting ready.
Yes.
While the RFP is being developed and the requirements, all of that technical stuff is going on. The people aspect, the organization, the governance. How are you going to run this? Because you have 1,000 employee airport that has 3 airports and 4 ports, or you have a transit agency that has multimodal operations.
Yep.
The buses need to run on time. The planes need to take off. Your ERP project also needs to go at the same time. So how are you going to sync this? So that example you gave makes me cringe, because what product implementation for a large county doesn't involve people?
Right. It's it's an assessment of your organization on the front end and taking the time to say, if we're going to do this right, this is what we need to dedicate for this project. You can do it right once, or you can do it twice. And there's all these horror stories out there of implementations gone wrong and failed ERPs. And I'm willing to bet that 75% of those are due to I don't want to say lack of planning, but really looking at the human capital piece of the equation. Yes, this is technology, but people are behind all of this technology. And if you don't have the dedicated resources on the front end, regardless of what the vendor tells you and how much they will say, oh, this is all on us, we can handle 100% of it, they can't. There still is a significant effort required by the organization deploying this technology internally. And you have to plan for that on the front end. And you're spot on. There's a project we've been working on now for 15, 18 months. We're still planning. We're actually in the demo phase right now of these vendors. We haven't even started the implementation yet. And it's because we are setting this project up to be successful. And the planning on the front end, regardless of what the vendors tell you, and following their process, you have to have the dedicated resources internally to ensure success.
So this came up in a meeting a couple of days ago. This client did an RFP. It's a council of governments. Did an RFP, got 20 responses, and it's the usual gamut of who's providing services to government today. It was Tyler Tech, Oracle, Workday, CGI, SAP, and every one of those products, except for CGI, they have a system implementer, or Tyler also, right? They do it themselves. But the SI also does those things.
That's right.
In their proposals, they have governance, they have change management, they have all of the stuff that goes around the actual configuration of the system. And you're saying do it 18 months in advance. How is the client, one, supposed to have that kind of patience? And two, if the SI is going to do it when they come on board, why are you wasting our time 18 months in advance?
One of those, so the patience piece is tough because we often walk into a new client and get them all whipped up in a frenzy, excited about an ERP, and then it's, oh wait, we've now got to get the we got to do our assessment and get the RFP built, and it's got to be on the street for 45 days, and then we got a 5-month procurement process, and then got to go through the red lines and terms and conditions, and we kicked it off today, but we'll be starting implementation 15 months from now. Part of that is change management and how you communicate that and work with the organization on rolling out the right information to the right people at the right time. On the other side, with the vendors and the SIs, I'll be a bit more critical than I usually am of them because we have good relationships with all of them. They are incentivized to get through this thing as quickly as possible, to check those boxes and meet the milestones and get in and get out. And again, back to the original point of this conversation, the vendor process, you have to make sure that they're not just rushing through everything because that's their goal. They want to get through this implementation and get on to the next one without having to hire additional people and increase their overhead and cost. And so they're going to want to rush through a lot of things. And I just had this happen on a call last week where a vendor was saying, oh, we completed that milestone and submitted it to your accounts receivable team. And I chimed in, my project sponsor was on the call, and I said, where's the deliverable associated with that milestone? And they're like, oh, it's meeting notes. And I said, that's not a deliverable. Meeting notes are not a deliverable. I think about the way the project is set up, and to keep them from rushing through it or saying they're going to handle it later is really diving into the scope and the statement of work and the payment terms on the front end of the contract. So they're not just trying to rush through and check those boxes and move on to the next one.
Yeah, and we've talked about this for years, right?
Yeah.
It keeps happening.
It does.
There's uh, there's room there because there's another video on our channel about project roles.
Mhm.
There's a sponsor, there's functional leads, there's a PMO that does specific things, there's OCM management, and different clients do it different ways. Some have OCM in-house, some do it with us, some lean on the vendor with our support. But in no successful case have I seen it not done, A, the people part, and B, the phase zero that we're talking about.
Mhm.
That is that is the key to not getting locked into anything.
Right.
That is the key to making sure that you can do this while keeping your buses running, that nothing's going to fall apart just because you're putting an ERP in place. And that's what happens, right? Leadership at some point has to make a decision on, what am I going to prioritize here?
Mhm.
Is it business as usual, our business of running buses or serving citizens, or are we going to mess with this? Am I going to let my purchasing or payroll clerk that everything hinges on, every payroll cycle, to go sit in on a 2-week configuration session? And that's not a decision you can make on the spot.
Yeah. And you got me thinking, asset management's been talking about buses. Another way you can kind of buck the trend on getting locked into the vendor process is on the contracting side. Instead of the traditional milestone
Mhm.
agreements, we're seeing more and more clients adapt a KPI-based metric for implementation. And vendors will push back on it, but there's strong, really strong opinions on the client side of saying, we won't agree to this milestone until 99.9% of AR is running correctly through this. Or we see a reduction in our, this one's more optimization side, but our accounts, our procure to pay process is fully implemented and we've run X number through it and it's done it in the number of days you said you could do it in your RFP response or in our contract. If they say they can reduce your procure to pay by X amount, let's hold them to that. That's part of the, they're trying to lock you into their process. We want to lock you into outcomes, not the process.
Hard thing to grasp unless you've gone through it, right? And the point of the phase zero is to make sure you're ready.
Yep.
All right, let's take a couple of questions from the audience here. We talk a little more about vendor accountability. What leverage do organizations have when it comes to contract negotiations?
I think for larger ERP implementations, you're often going to see anywhere from 3 to 5 people or firms contracted. I think a key thing in leveraging that is having a single throat to choke, right? And I'm not going to try and go down the indemnity path and who's responsible for what, but there needs to be who's going to be the party held responsible. Usually these days we're seeing it's the SI. Yes, the firms will have their own responsibility for technology, but it's the process and the day-to-day operations of that project. That's who I'm going to hold accountable. That's who answers to Avera. That's who answers to the PMO for the organizations we're implementing these things for. It needs to funnel through a single phase. And then also on the contract negotiation side, having a single one that it all funnels up to makes it easier. That's hard to negotiate, but it can be done. We routinely see it done with, especially with SIs. They're the ones more willing to accept that risk. And when you see, I'm giving away a little bit of the secret here, Evie. When you see someone willing to accept the risk, that also gives you more leverage in negotiation. If they're willing to assume that, it helps out a lot.
Okay. Next question, Cary, for you. What implementation mindset enables organizations to adopt future state processes while preserving long-term flexibility and vendor independence?
Oh man, this is
What mindset?
a little recent.
Because it is a mindset.
It is a mindset.
You can have all of the processes and methodologies, but if you're not going at it, let me start, like a partnership mindset is critical.
It is.
No vendor, no consultant is going to do this for you by themselves because we don't know the organization. You know it best. We try our best, right? But we need a partnership because things will be bumpy, things will go off the rails, no matter how much you plan. but the mindset of partnership is absolutely essential from phase zero to go live.
Mhm. I often get in trouble when we're doing future state because I tell the clients to dream big. And I'll caveat that by saying I'm not saying we can accomplish all of this, but our goal is to try and accomplish most of it. I think the mindset is if you were to take all the knowledge you have of your organization today and rebuild that factory or that assembly line from scratch, what would it look like? And what redundancy and manual processes would you try and remove out? I think about a client close to ours where we're headquartered here. Their permit approval process had a lot of redundancy and manual things in it. And I want to say, don't quote me on this, but there were something like 45 steps needed to go through the approval process. And through some optimization work we did, we got it down to 12. And so in really taking it, so the mindset I would say is dream big, but and hope to accomplish, the majority of that. Some of these things you can't get rid of entirely, but to look at your organization and think about the mindset is like, think about the redundancies that really just make your blood boil, right? That you say, why are we doing it this way? Why is it going from procurement to finance to budget officer to back to finance and then procurement for approval when we could just streamline this workflow? Like that's the mindset I would have is what frustrates you and dream big.
Yeah, so and we've had pushback on that,
We have.
right? Because how are they supposed to dream big when they don't know
Right.
what's available? One, and right now with AI and Gentic, all the vendors saying their sausage is the best. We because it has AI in it. What's dreaming big could be a liability,
Mhm.
right? Plus, it's our job to make sure that you get them to dream big, but then it's funneled into reality, and it's not just pie in the sky stuff, which leads you to more customizations, more complications. So where's that line? How do you keep your clients, or what's the process rather? Because I get it. You probably let them dream big and then translate that to reality.
That's the majority of the process is they'll say, well, we want a fully automated accounts receivable. Love the idea. We're not there yet. I think the other part is that I like that you brought up AI because it's a popular topic in every meeting I have these days. If you're doing an RFP, making sure that you're incorporating bits of that and that the vendors are showing you not what's in their pipeline, but what they're working on today that will be rolled out in the next 18 months. Anybody can tell you about what's in their pipeline. Oh, we're working on automating hire to retire, or, procure to pay, you name it. That's a pipe dream, literally. It's why it's called a pipeline. But it's see what they're actually doing today. And again, back to the reference checks, right? Talk to recent clients who have gone live in the past 12 months about the AI features that were there and how that was. Think about the future state and reference calls. What did you all want to accomplish? How many of those were actually done with the implementation in the promise software?
Yeah, and I think you have to really define what you want out of a future state.
Yes.
It really is working backwards, and these are the things that are sort of dry. People don't want to spend time on. There's very few clients that actually mean it when they say we want our processes to modernize.
Mhm.
And there's two different flavors, right? One is you blow everything up and you start fresh, or you're going to tweak your current processes, which is hard to do if you're replacing a system that's been embedded in your processes for 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
So process analysis is it really depends on what the client wants to do, what their vision is, and how does the system then fit into it.
And that's a good point. We've got a large client in the Southwest who has a very aggressive organizational goal to be entirely paperless by 2028, I believe. And we have positioned their entire RFP on how it can help them meet that goal. And that is, talk about future state visioning. That's a bold vision, but we are going to get there with the software they're going to select is going to help them accomplish that goal. And it will be, notice the goal is not by 2027, but it's by 28 because there's still some things they have to work on and configurations they have to make and and adjustments, but we position the entire thing to help them meet that goal. And that was their future state goal from the onset, is they want to be paperless. So
Yeah, that is ambitious, but not impossible to do.
right,
Right?
it's not today.
If you're intentional about it. So I'm going to ask the last question that comes to mind,
Okay.
and then we can wrap. When it comes to uh, change management, right? There's two emerging trends that we've been in meetings recently where we're trying to sell a product or service to the client, and two things keep coming up. What's your change management approach?
Yep.
And two is, are you really independent, right? And I'll talk to the second one because there are consultants that claim to be independent, but they're not. And clients hire us because we're independent, truly because we're not reselling a product. But the pushback we get on that, right, especially from our vendor friends, like, how do you know what to recommend when you don't know our product, right? You haven't really configured it, implemented it. What are you recommending to our clients? And it seems to be missing the point. It's not about the product. So the second half of that question to me is, when products become homogenous,
Mm-hmm.
they all have unique selling points.
They
Right?
do.
Someone has a better cloud structure, someone has some. But at the end of the day, you want your accounts receivables or payables to work. You want payroll to run. You want general ledger to be clean. You want reporting to be great. And they can all do that. All of the products we listed,
Yep.
they can all do that. So when you're sitting through selection meetings and demos and clients decide, we're facilitating. When the clients decide which product to go with or which set of vendors to go with all things being equal, what are you seeing as being the deciding factor?
I'll try not to have this clouded by recency bias, but I think the key one for me is implementation approach and timelines. Are what they pitching going to align with this organization and how we've gotten to know them at Avero and how they operate? Or is it going to be so disruptive to their business processes that it will be failed from the start? We had one recently where, as part of our RFP, we proposed a implementation approach, and the vendor proposed a totally different solution, and it did not sit right with that organization. And you could see visibly people squirming in their seats because they knew how disruptive it would be for them to even think about this approach. That's been key. And then change management, to bring it full circle. What is their approach on how they're going to get this organization to adopt new processes and new technology? Because if your adoption rate is low, the entire thing it's been a waste of everyone's time. Change management has been from 25 and going into 26 one of the most popular topics. And you're looking at public, institutions that have been using a technology and a process for, on average, we're seeing anywhere from 15 to 20 years, that are going to be upending the entire way they do things as a business, and making sure you have a solid change management plan that, talk about homogenous, with the implementation approach is so key to this. Even simple things like time entry. There's still a lot of organizations who have manual time entry where you're going in with a punch card. How are you going to replace that? How are you going to get high adoption? You've now got police officers, paramedics, firefighters, people working in a marine terminal who are used to taking their punch card and putting it in a machine. You have to strategically place the kiosk, get them trained, time it right so you don't train them 8 months before implementation or go live so they've forgotten how to do it, and then support them when there's issues. That's all part of a change management approach, and rolling that out in a timely manner to where things are done at the right time, not too soon, not too late, but right in line with the implementation and go live.
So here's a problem that we face also, right?
Mhm.
You respond to RFP, get shortlisted, get on a Zoom call, half the people are not paying attention, cameras turned off. That's why we prefer going on site for these
It
meetings.
is.
But it happens too with software demos. How do you, and I'm not talking about methodology or how they'll eventually do it, but it comes down to people will have scoring sheets and they'll rank features and all of that. Is it the people presenting? Is it is that a good indication of how this implementation is going to go? What makes one stand out over the other if all features are alike
I've been in demos.
in that meeting?
I've been in demos a lot the past 3
Yeah.
months.
That's why I'm asking.
One is that the organization who's doing this makes the environment as comfortable as possible, right? Snacks, energy drinks, coffee, not too hot or too cold, plenty of sunlight, breaks throughout the day. That's what an organization can do to help support their people.
Mhm.
On the vendor side, the person presenting is a large part of it. These are not necessarily, for some people, I find them interesting because I'm an ERP geek. But for some of these things, if you've got, you look at a fully or well-developed evaluation team, you're going to have people from HR, finance, procurement, the controller's office, IT, you name it. And there's going to be a lot of areas that they don't find interesting. How can you make it interesting and get them engaged and make sure to highlight things that will pique their interest so that if they are on Teams or they're working on their scoring sheet, they'll be like, wait, what was that? What did you say? Because that's important to me.
Mhm.
We've seen that a lot, especially with the in the procurement finance budget world where there's some similarities there, where they have their dependencies, I guess is the best way to say it. Making sure there's something in there baked in that responds to them. Also just customizing the demo to where it's specific to that client. It's funny, we had one recently where they used a lot of generic names in the demo, and one of the names that two of the vendors used happened to be the head executive of the organization. And so every time that person's name was used as part of the demo script, the entire crowd would giggle and laugh. It was a little distracting, but also kept them engaged. So customizing the demo to where it's using their logo, using actual shots you've taken while on site. We had a vendor go through it and do there's a client we have who has a feature of their building that is very it's popular. It's got its own Instagram page. And they made sure to get pictures of everybody on their demo team with that particular feature inside this organization. Really tweaking it to let them know that you're in it with them and aligned with them and understand, at least from as much as you can, that organization, what they value and things that are important to them.
Cary, this has been enlightening. We'll have to do part 2 at some point.
Yes.
But thanks for joining me.
Thank you. And thank all of you all.
I'm going to pop up some QR codes. There's an ERP transformation survival kit that you're seeing on your screen. Snap the QR code. It's got some great information and tips and tools of the trade to do this process right. Because when you select a product, you're not just selecting a software. You're selecting an implementer. You're choosing a path forward that will transform your organization. So not to be taken lightly. And this report or toolkit will give you a lot of the answers you're looking for. But if you need more, you know where to find us. We're live every Wednesday, and there's lots of great free content on our website, on our YouTube channel. Please go check it out. But we'll see you next time.